Daniel Sports Center, we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the Week 4 matchup between the Duke Blue Devils and the Kansas Jayhawks. The surprise big matchup coming up here in Week 4. Both teams usually aren't big contenders in college football, but both teams are 3-0. They're undefeated heading into this matchup. The winner of this game more than likely will be ranked heading into Week 5. And we could very well see one of these two teams become the big surprise team of the season. So definitely a very intriguing matchup coming up here in Week 4. We'll be going over a full game preview and prediction on this matchup here today, starting out with your team trends. Duke beat North Carolina A&T 49-20 in their Week 3 matchup. So, Duke being 3-0, Kansas being 3-0, this is pretty unexpected, seeing both these teams undefeated coming into this matchup. But it's obviously a huge opportunity for both these teams. Duke and Kansas both heading into the season had extremely low expectations. Most predictions had Duke probably at 3 or 4 wins this season. Most predictions had Kansas at 2-4. So for both teams to have 3 wins in their first 3 games is pretty remarkable. And so, you got Kansas. They beat Houston 48-30. That game was close for a while, but Kansas pulled away. And, Kansas has a couple of good wins. They beat West Virginia in Week 2 on the road in overtime. And, if you look at Duke, they went on the road to Northwestern, who's a Big Ten team. Of course, Northwestern is one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, but still, it's a road win against a Big Ten opponent. So, both teams 3-0, and this is a game with fairly high stakes for both these teams. You'd expect this to be a pretty big matchup. Well, it always is if these two teams meet in college basketball. You got 2 major blue bloods in college basketball here, but not so much in college football, so it makes it all the more interesting. Games will be on Saturday, September 24th in Lawrence, Kansas. So the Jayhawks are the home team for this matchup, and it's sold out for this game, which is a fairly big deal for Kansas. So it's going to be a packed house for this one. Your spread's going Kansas by 7.5. Over under is 63.5, and your FPI is going Kansas 72.7%. Series history: Kansas leads at 2-1. Win streak is Duke by 2. So Duke is one of the past 2 matchups. We really haven't seen these two teams play each other all that much, but they did play last season, and Duke did beat Kansas in that matchup. Stat comparison for this one: Duke 36 points per game, 14 points allowed, 255 passers a game, 205 rush yards, and then for yards allowed, 228 passing, 119 for rushing. So, statistically, both teams have been great so far this season. Kansas is scoring an average of 53 points per game. That's pretty remarkable for Kansas, being a team that, last season was pretty poor offensively, but Jalen Daniels, he has really come around. He is an excellent football player, and you could consider him to be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12, and who knows, with time, he could be one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Defensively, Duke has been slightly better, 14 points allowed. Kansas has played some more higher scoring games. They've allowed 27 on average per game. Passers a game, 194 for Kansas, 259 rush yards a game. The leading rusher for this team is indeed Jalen Daniels, their quarterback. And then for yards allowed, 244 passing, 137 for rushing. So both teams fairly good statistically. Recent matchups: Duke beat North Carolina A&T 49-20, beat Northwestern on the road 31-23, and shut out Temple in Week 1 30-0. If you compare that with Kansas beat Houston 40-30, which, by the way, Houston coming into the season had some high expectations. They were a team that was widely considered to be a potential 10-11 win team this season. With the talent that they returned off of their great 2021 season, it makes sense why Houston had high expectations. But now Houston's 1-2, and Houston's a good football team, and Kansas went there and beat them by 18. Something to consider there. Houston is talented, and Kansas took care of them. West Virginia beat them 45-42 in overtime. Obviously, huge win there. And West Virginia just last night took care of Virginia Tech, the Thursday night game of the big Thursday night game of Week 4. And Virginia Tech, they're not a very good football team this season, but West Virginia, to beat them like that, the way they did, that just makes it even more impressive for Kansas, seeing them beat West Virginia like they did. And then Tennessee Tech beat them 56-10 as well for Kansas in Week 1. So both teams with decent resumes so far. Key points for this one: both teams 3-0 and undefeated. Duke defensively, they've been impressive this season. Duke has been more impressive on defense, I would say. Kansas on the flip side has been more impressive on offense, or actually I'd say very impressive on offense. I mean, once again, 53 average points for Kansas in their first 3 games, which is, I mean, this is the best offense we've seen out of Kansas in a long time. I mean, it's been a while since Kansas has looked this good, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Riley Leonard for Duke shows potential. He's put up 700 yards, 5 touchdowns, 2 picks so far this season. Not terrible stats. But obviously I've been extremely impressed by Jalen Daniels with Kansas. 560 yards of passing, 7 touchdowns, does have a pick. But once again, he's also the lead rusher on this team with over 230 yards and 3 touchdowns so far this season. And Jalen Daniels, he's the best quarterback we've seen out of Kansas. And it's been a while since we've seen a great quarterback come out of Kansas. And Jalen Daniels, I think, is the one currently that is he's been outstanding so far this season, and he definitely could be that for the Jayhawks. And he already has been. I mean, once again, Kansas on offense, 53 average points per game so far this season. I mean, and quite honestly, both these teams have potential to be the big surprise team of the 2022 season. It sounds wild because both these teams, once again, it's such low expectations going into this season. And so for both teams to be 3-0 heading into this matchup, I personally, even I'm going to admit here, I never could have expected that we'd see both these teams 3-0 heading into this matchup. So it's definitely the sneaky, interesting matchup coming up here in week 4. Definitely one that you want to keep an eye on. But that said, let's get to the prediction here for Duke and Kansas coming up here in week 4 of the college football season. I'm going to go with Kansas to get the win here. 31-27 is my predicted final score. I see this being a pretty close game. Both teams very capable of winning this one, but Kansas, I really like the Jayhawks and how they're looking right now. The way they looked against Houston, even against West Virginia. I mean, Kansas on offense has been outstanding. And I mean, Duke's got a promising defense so far this season, but I feel like Kansas's offense, the way they're playing right now, I mean, they are. I mean, I've been impressed by both teams so far this season, considering all the factors and the returning production of both these teams. But Kansas in particular, I've just been extremely impressed by. And with them being at home in this matchup in front of a sold-out crowd, it's been a while for Kansas to be a relevant college football team. And I mean, this is a pretty big deal for Kansas, and I feel like this team takes advantage of that, and they get the win here, 31-27. I'm going to say 55% towards Kansas, so I do think the game could go either way for sure. But you're over under 65.5. I'll take the under for this one, and also Duke to cover the spread in the end. The spread is currently 7.5 points towards Kansas, so I do think Duke keeps it close. I honestly could see Kansas scoring more than 31 as well. The over-under is tough to predict on this one. I mean, if you're going to pick Duke to win, definitely take the under. For Kansas to win, honestly, you might honestly go for the over. I'm predicting it to be closer and not Kansas not to score quite as many points as the past few weeks. But, I mean, definitely if you're picking Kansas here, I mean, don't be afraid to predict the over. But I am taking the under for this one for now. And once again, Duke to cover the spread. So, definitely a very interesting matchup coming up here in week 4, Duke and Kansas. Usually you'd think it'd be a huge basketball game, huge college basketball game, but turns out it's a decent football game this year as well. So, yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Duke and Kansas, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.